You walked into my house. You pointed a gun at what is mine.
This is not your business.
3 years you have been running from what you did.
She brought you into this. She is the reason standing here.
It seems you underestimated me, Marcus. That was a mistake.
Tell me one reason I shouldn't pull this trigger right now. The gun was already drawn. Marcus Vale, 6'2" of expensive suits and old violence, stood in the middle of Kang Jiwoo's penthouse living room, with the barrel aimed directly at Zara's chest. His accent split the silence like a blade. Half French, half Lagos. All danger. His grip was completely steady. His eyes carried the specific blankness of a man who had pulled triggers before and slept well after. Zara didn't move. She stood with her back against the floor-to-ceiling window. Seoul blazing gold and neon 72 floors below her like the city itself was holding its breath. And she looked at Marcus the way you looked at something that had already lost and simply hadn't been told yet. Her hands were open at her sides. Because, she said, her voice quieter than the room deserved, you didn't come here to kill me, Marcus. You came here because you still cannot figure out how I got away from you. His jaw tightened. The gun didn't move. You forged documents. Each word dropped flat and deliberate. You crossed into South Korea on a dead woman's identity. You walked into the home of the most dangerous man in Seoul. One step forward. His shoe made no sound on the marble. I trained you better than that. You left tracks. And yet, she said, it still took you 8 months to find me. Her chin lifted 1 degree. Just one. That says considerably more about you than it does about me. The shot cracked through the air. Not from Marcus's gun. The weapon flew from his hand so violently fast he didn't understand what had happened until he was already staring at his empty palm. The bullet had punched through the ceiling. Plaster dust drifted down through the dark penthouse air like slow snow, catching the Seoul city light coming through the windows, settling on Marcus's shoulders like something almost ceremonial. He turned. Kang Jiwoo walked into the room. Not running, not shouting, moving. The way he always moved, like the world had already arranged itself to his preference, and everyone else was simply in the process of catching up. White dress shirt open at the collar, the dark tattoo of Korean tigers and brushstroke art visible crawling up his neck on his skin above the collar. Dark eyes fixed on Marcus with the specific calm that was far more threatening than any rage had ever managed to be. Behind him, 2 of his men stepped out of the shadows like they had been part of the architecture all along. Mr. Vale. Jiwoo's voice was low, architectural, every word placed with the precision of a man who understood silence, did more damage than volume. You have exactly 30 seconds to explain why you are bleeding on my floor before I make the bleeding considerably worse. Marcus straightened slowly, still calculating, still looking for the angle. Because men like Marcus Vale never stopped looking for angles, even when every single exit was already sealed. He looked at Jiwoo, then at Zara. Realization and fury arriving together like weather that had been building for months. She's yours, he said. Jiwoo's eyes moved to Zara for exactly 1 second. 1. Then back to Marcus. Everything in this penthouse is mine, he said. That includes the air you are currently wasting. Wherever you are watching this, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far a story about a woman who hid in the wrong penthouse and ended up in the middle of something she never planned for can travel. And if this story found you at a moment when you needed to be reminded that being truly seen is possible, that it can find you when you least expect it, in the home of a dangerous stranger in a city that is not yours, on a night when you are just trying to survive, then you already know you need to stay for what comes next. Subscribe, because this is only the beginning. 8 months earlier, Zara had arrived in Seoul with 2 things: a forged identity and a plan held together with nerve and very little else. She had been running for 3 years before Seoul even appeared on her map. 3 years of new names and new cities assembled quickly and discarded even faster when Marcus's people got too close. A teacher in Lisbon, a hotel receptionist in Nairobi, a shop assistant in Kuala Lumpur, a translator in Taipei for exactly 11 days before she saw a face she recognized, sitting in a coffee shop with a newspaper, and walked out of her apartment with nothing but her documents and the cash she always kept folded inside her left shoe. She had learned how to read exits before she read menus, How to sleep lightly and pack in 4 minutes. How to say goodbye to places before she'd finished arriving in them. How to make herself forgettable. Shoulders slightly rounded, gaze slightly down. Voice slightly below what it naturally wanted to be. She was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. Tired deep in the bones. Tired in the specific place where a person's sense of who they actually were was supposed to live. But she was still moving. That was the thing she held on to. As long as she was moving, she was not finished. The position at the Kang Penthouse came together almost embarrassingly easily. A placement agency with loose verification protocols. A reference letter she wrote herself on stolen letterhead. A face interview with a household manager named Mrs. O, who was far more interested in whether Zara could iron without leaving creases than in examining documents too carefully. She got the job on a Tuesday. By Wednesday evening, she was standing in a penthouse on the 72nd floor of one of Seoul's most fortified residential towers, looking out at a city that didn't know her name. And she felt something move through her chest that she almost didn't recognize, like she could breathe. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, let herself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she filed it away and started memorizing the floor plan. She saw Jiwoo on her third day. He walked through the penthouse at 7 in the morning while she was laying out the breakfast service. And he did not look at her, did not acknowledge her, moved through the space like a man who owned not just the building, but the very concept of standing in it. Dark suit, white shirt fully buttoned to the collar. But at his neck, just above the fabric, the edge of something dark inked into his skin, just the edge of it. A tattoo beginning at his collar and going somewhere she couldn't see. She looked away immediately. She told herself she was not curious about him. She was lying to herself, and she knew it. By the end of the first week, she had learned his rhythms. Left early, returned late, coffee black. No ritual, like caffeine, was a transaction, not a pleasure. Read physical documents, never screens. Turning pages with a deliberateness that said he was memorizing, not reading. Stood at the east window some evenings and looked at Seoul with an expression she couldn't cleanly name. Something older and heavier than peace. She minded her work, kept her head down, counted days like currency. Then, on the 10th night, the first thing happened that she hadn't planned for. She was in the kitchen at 1 in the morning, couldn't sleep, hadn't slept properly in months, when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Not staff. Staff didn't walk that corridor at 1 in the morning. She froze. The footsteps stopped directly outside the kitchen door. She had the back exit in her peripheral vision. 4 steps. She could make 4 steps in 2 seconds. She was already calculating the route when the door opened. Jiwoo stood in the doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for 5 full seconds that felt much longer than 5 seconds. Then he crossed to the counter, filled a glass of water, and set it on the ledge beside her without a word. Without explanation. Without asking why she was in his kitchen at 1 in the morning with the face of a woman calculating exits. He left. She stood very still for a long time after he was gone. He knew. She didn't know exactly how much. Didn't know what exactly he had figured out. But the water was not coincidence, and that silence was not indifference. That was a man who knew something, and had decided, for reasons she couldn't yet identify, to let her know that he knew without saying a single word. She should have run that night. She didn't run. She told herself it was tactical. Nowhere better to go. She told herself a lot of things in those days she would later have to examine much more honestly. 3 days later, she laughed for the first time. She was in the kitchen, and Mrs. O said something about fermented radish that caught her completely off guard, and the laugh came out before she could catch it. Short, bright, real. The kind of laugh that surprised her with its own existence. She pressed her hand over her mouth immediately. She didn't. No, Jiwoo was in the hallway. Didn't know he stopped walking when he heard it. Didn't know that something in him, something he had been keeping behind glass for 3 years, carefully and deliberately behind glass, cracked slightly at the sound of it. The way old ice cracked. Barely audible. Deep. The kind of crack that didn't close. The end of week 2 brought a danger she hadn't planned for. She was crossing the tower lobby on her afternoon hour off, 1 hour per day outside the penthouse, 1 hour she used to breathe and plan and try to feel like a person who still had choices. When she saw him, a man, sitting at the lobby cafe with a newspaper and a cup of coffee, medium height, dark jacket, Korean enough to blend into the lobby of a Seoul residential tower. But she knew his face. She had last seen it in Nairobi, 3 days before she ran, standing outside the hotel where she had been working. He was one of Marcus's. She didn't stop walking, didn't look twice, kept. Her pace exactly the same, shoulders slightly rounded, gaze forward, nothing sudden, nothing registering as fear. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, got in. The second the doors closed, she pressed her back against the elevator wall and breathed deliberately through her nose. He might not have seen her, might be watching the building generally, might not know she was specifically inside it, or he might be on his phone right now. She had 30 minutes before she was expected back upstairs. She used them to access her emergency account, contact the exit route contact she had identified 2 weeks ago in Seoul, and confirm her documents had roughly 30 days before the seams became visible to someone looking specifically for them. 30 days. When she got back to the penthouse, Jiwoo was standing in the main corridor. He looked at her face when she walked in. One look. He said nothing. That evening, a second security rotation was added to the building's lobby level. She found out from Park the next morning, mentioned casually. She stood in the kitchen processing that for a long time. He had seen something in her face when she came back, and he had responded to it, without asking, without requiring anything, without making her explain a single thing. She didn't know what to do with that kind of care from a man like him, so she filed it, kept moving, kept counting. The day Ryu Dae-yoon arrived changed the geometry of everything. Zara had been told a meeting was happening. Mrs. O had given the instructions that morning. The formal receiving room, the good crystal, the security sweep that Park ran through twice before anyone arrived. The whole penthouse had a different energy that day. Tighter, more deliberate. Staff moving with extra precision. She had done her work, made herself unremarkable, and was crossing the bright hallway with a tray when the elevator opened. Ryu Dae-hyun walked in like the penthouse had been designed specifically to frame him. Dark hair, sleek and styled. A charcoal suit that understood exactly what it was doing. Warm, toned skin catching the afternoon light. Handsome in a way that was approachable rather than sharp. And approachable, in her experience, was always the more dangerous kind because approachable made you lower things you should keep raised. The tattoo sleeve on his left arm partially visible at his wrist where his cuff ended. Dark geometric lines on skin. He was laughing at something his associate had said. A real laugh. Warm, completely unguarded. Nothing performed about it. The kind of laugh that filled a hallway. He stepped into the hallway, and the laugh stopped. Because he saw her. Not a glance. Not the polite visual acknowledgement afforded to staff. He actually stopped mid-stride and looked at her. Looked at her the way people looked at things that rearranged their thinking, like she was the most unexpected and interesting thing he had encountered in a very long time. And he wasn't remotely interested in pretending otherwise. Jiwoo has new staff, he said. Not to her. Not to anyone in particular. His eyes still completely on her face. The afternoon light in the hallway falling across both of them. Sir? She dipped her head, kept moving. I don't remember him ever hiring anyone who looked like she'd rather be somewhere else, he said, still to no one, but loud enough, that she was clearly meant to hear every word. She kept walking. She felt his eyes on her back the entire length of the hallway. She did not look back. She was more annoyed than she wanted to be about the fact that the urge was there at all. Inside the receiving room, Seoul afternoon light came through the penthouse windows and fell across everything making the crystal on the side table. Catch and throw. Small bright points of light across the walls. Jiwoo was already seated. He didn't stand when Dae-hyun entered, a deliberate statement in a relationship built entirely on deliberate statements. The two men occupied the bright formal space, with the specific tension of people who had once tried very hard to destroy each other and had settled into an armed coexistence that neither fully trusted and both currently found necessary. The afternoon light made it all look cleaner and colder than it was. She poured. Stepped back, made herself invisible, except Dae-hyun's eyes found her across the room, and Jiwoo noticed. She saw the shift, barely visible, just a tightening at his jaw, just the direction of his attention changing, the way his gaze moved from Dae-hyun's face to track exactly where Dae-hyun was looking. His expression didn't change, but something underneath it moved for the first time. She left as fast as professionally possible. Dae-hyun found her in the hallway 20 minutes later. He was leaning against the wall outside the kitchen with the ease of a man who made himself at home in spaces that weren't his. The afternoon light still bright through the far windows, and he looked up the moment she appeared like he had been expecting precisely her. "You're not actually staff," he said. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." The smile, slow, warm, completely aware of itself. Staff don't hold their tray like it might need to become a weapon at short notice. She said nothing. He pushed off the wall and closed the distance. Not crowding. Deliberate. His eyes on her face with a directness completely different from Jiwoo's. Where Jiwoo's attention felt like being studied through glass, Dae-hyun's felt like being stood directly in front of and actually looked at with nothing between them at all. "You're hiding from something," he said, "and you picked the most fortified penthouse in Seoul to do it in, which is either very smart or very desperate. Or both," she said, before she could stop herself. Something shifted in his expression, warmed genuinely. "Or both," he agreed, like he was genuinely pleased by her answer. He stepped closer. His voice dropped lower. "You don't belong in his cage, love." Quietly, like something he actually believed rather than something calculated to land well. "Whatever you're running from, there are better options than this." "You don't know what I'm running from?" "No." His eyes moved across her face, reading her in a way that was uncomfortably accurate, the afternoon light catching the warmth in his expression. "But I know Jiwoo, and I know nothing in his world is ever as simple as it looks. Whatever arrangement you think you have here, make sure you understand the actual terms." He reached up and adjusted the collar of her uniform. His fingers barely touched her neck. His eyes found hers and held them in the bright hallway. The air between them shifted into something charged and quiet despite the daylight around them. "But if it ever starts feeling like a warning," he held out the card, plain black, a number, nothing else. "Find a way to reach me." She took it. Their fingers touched briefly. He stepped back. Something in his expression returning to something more controlled, like he had reminded himself of a boundary he had decided on before he got here. He walked back toward the receiving room. She stood in the bright hallway holding the card and feeling something warm and complicated that she didn't have a clean name for. The afternoon light still coming through the far windows. Seoul outside going about its enormous indifferent business. She kept the card. Jiwoo came back one evening and stood beside her at the living room window. She was looking at the city. He appeared at her side without announcing himself, the way he had been doing more frequently. Not intrusively, not obviously, just present in whatever room she was in. She could feel the warmth of him along her arm, the tattoo at his neck visible in her peripheral vision above his collar. Neither of them spoke for almost 10 minutes. Then he said quietly, "Do you like it?" "The city." She considered the question honestly. "I like that it doesn't ask anything of me," she said. A pause. He looked back at the city, and she looked back at the city, and they stood together in the quiet until he left without saying goodnight. She stood at the window after he was gone with her hand pressed flat against the cold glass, and told herself to be careful. She was not being careful. She was fully aware of this. She was choosing not to be careful with full knowledge of what that meant, and that frightened her more than Marcus had in a long time. 2 days later, Jiwoo appeared in the kitchen doorway on a quiet afternoon and said, "Sit with me." She made 2 cups of tea, brought them to the small table by the kitchen window, sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and outside Seoul moved far below, traffic and light and the city going about its enormous, indifferent business. "Tell me something." "True," he said. Not a command, a request. And from a man who calculated and directed and decided, a request was its own revelation. She held his gaze, making a decision she hadn't finished making. "I used to paint," she said, "in Lagos before everything. Watercolors. Not well. But I loved the way they moved, the way you couldn't control them completely. The way they always did something you didn't plan for. She paused. I haven't painted in 3 years. I don't know if I remember how. He was quiet, looking at her with those dark eyes. You will remember, he said, like it was simply true, not comfort. Fact. Something loosened slightly in her chest. Your turn, she said. He looked almost surprised, like reciprocity in this kind of conversation was genuinely new territory. I cannot parallel park, he said. She stared at him. I have a driver, he said. I have never needed to learn. But there have been 3 occasions in my life when I have attempted it, and all 3 were... He paused. Unsuccessful. She started laughing before she could stop herself. Not the short, surprised kitchen laugh, but a real one. Full and warm, her hand coming to her mouth, her eyes finding his across the table. He looked at her laughing, and something moved across his face that she felt in her entire body, like a door opening in a room that had been dark for a long time. He didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, just enough. That is the most human thing you have ever said to me, she told him. Don't tell anyone, he said. She smiled at him across the small table, and he looked back at her, and for one long, completely unguarded moment, they were simply 2 people sitting together with no performance between them, and no architecture, and no agenda. She felt the danger of it, the specific sweet danger of wanting something you hadn't planned to want, in a situation that had no room for it. She didn't move away from the table. 2 days after the kitchen table. Conversation, she was cleaning the east corridor when she heard raised voices coming from behind the closed study door. Not Jiwoo's voice. She had never heard Jiwoo raise his voice. Not once. And she was beginning to understand that was one of the most dangerous things about him. The other voice was unfamiliar. Sharp. Demanding. Korean she couldn't follow, but the tone translated perfectly across any language. She kept moving. Kept her head down. Made herself unremarkable the way she had been trained by 3 years of necessity. The study door opened. A man came out, shorter than Jiwoo, older, a dark suit and the specific bearing of someone who held authority and used it carelessly. He stopped when he saw her, looked at her the way some men looked at women who worked in other people's houses, like she was furniture that had been placed inconveniently. His eyes moved over her slowly. She kept her expression completely neutral. He said something in Korean. She didn't catch all of it, but she caught enough. Something about the new girl. Something with an inflection that made her skin tighten. Then Jiwoo appeared in the doorway behind him. He looked at the man. Then at Zara. One look at her face. Just one. Just a fraction of a second. And something shifted in his expression that she had no word for yet, but felt in her chest like a drop in temperature. He spoke to the man in Korean. His voice was quiet. Each word placed with the specific care of a man who understood that the quieter he spoke, the more dangerous the content. The man's bearing changed. Subtly, but changed. The man left without looking at her again. Jiwoo stood in the doorway watching him go. Then he looked at Zara. She looked back at him. He crossed the corridor to where she was standing, stopped in front of her, and looked at her face like he was checking something, making sure something was intact. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, she said. He held her gaze, like he was deciding whether she meant it. He will not be returning to this building, he said. Simply. She looked at him. At this cold, architectural, impossible man who had just quietly dismantled someone for looking at her wrong in his corridor. Without drama, without performance. Like it was simply the correct thing to do and required no discussion. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, he said. I did. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he went back into his study and closed the door. She stood in the corridor for a long time after that. She was in serious trouble and she knew it. Not the Marcus kind of trouble. The kind that crept up on you from the inside and had no exit route and no forged document that could fix it. The kind that felt terrifyingly like home. That evening he found her at the north window, the one she had started preferring over the others, though she had told herself it had nothing to do with the fact that it was the one he could see from his study doorway. He said, in the rain, when you said you stopped loving it in Lisbon. What did you love about it before? She looked at him. The question was so specific and so quiet, and so completely unexpected, that she almost didn't know what to do with it. The sound of it, she said, on windows especially. When I was a child in Lagos, the rain was loud. Really loud, not this. She gestured at the grey drizzle against the glass. Not this polite soul rain, real rain, the kind that meant something. She paused. My mother used to make tea when it rained, and we would sit by the window and she would tell me things about her own mother, about where we came from, about who we were. She stopped. I haven't thought about that in a very long time. He was quiet for a moment. What was her name? Adaze, she said. Tell me about her, he said. She looked at him. At it, this man asking about her mother, by the window in the grey soul evening, like it was the most natural thing in the world. So she did. Slowly at first, then more. Adaze who was loud and precise and who made the best jollof in Lagos, and who had opinions about everything, and shared them with the full confidence of someone who had earned everyone. Adaze who had worked 3 jobs to get Zara to London, and who had cried at the airport not because she was sad, but because she was proud, and couldn't contain it, and didn't try to. Adaze who Zara had not spoken to in 8 months, because calling her would create a traceable signal, and she could not put her mother in Marcus's path. 8 months, she said. I haven't heard her voice in 8 months. She hadn't meant to say that. It came out before she caught it. She pressed her lips together, looked at the grey city. Jiwoo was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and took her hand, not dramatically, not making anything of it, just her hand in his, warm and steady, and there. After this is finished, he said quietly, you will call her. She felt the words move through her, the specific weight of a future spoken out loud by someone who intended to help make it happen. She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment, so she just held his hand and looked at Seoul in the rain, and thought about her mother, and the sound of real rain on Lagos windows, and how strange, and how right it was to be standing here as herself, her actual self, her real name, her real grief, holding the hand of the most dangerous man she had ever met and feeling, against every reasonable instinct she had, safe. He didn't let go of her hand. They stood like that until the rain stopped. Then one night, everything accelerated. She was at the east window in the late evening, the one she had started standing at because it was where he stood, and she had stopped pretending she didn't know why. When she heard him come in behind her, he crossed the room without speaking. He stopped behind her, close, and she could feel the warmth of him all along her back, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Just the city below and the dark around them, and the specific charged quality of 2 people who had been careful for too long, standing close enough to feel each other breathe. I know about the man in the lobby, he said quietly. My people have been watching him for 6 days. He's confirmed. He doesn't know you're here yet, but he's getting closer. She turned around. He was right there, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes, and his eyes were right there, dark and direct and carrying something that wasn't coldness, and wasn't distance, and wasn't anything she had expected to find when she turned around. How long do I have? She asked. Weeks, he said. Maybe less. She looked at him, at the sharp face and the blonde streak, and the tattoo at his neck, and the man underneath all of it who had put water on a ledge at 2 a.m, and added a security rotation without being asked, and was standing here now telling her things he didn't have to tell her. Why are you telling me this? She asked. He held her gaze for a long moment. Because you deserve to know, he said, simply, like it was the most obvious answer. Something moved through her chest. She didn't try to name it. She just felt it. He reached up slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, and pushed one lock from her face. His fingers barely grazed her cheek, the tattoo on the back of his hand catching the low light. She didn't step back. I'm going to need you to tell me the rest of what you know, she said quietly, about why I'm really here. He looked at her, something shifting behind his eyes, the glass starting to come down. Not tonight, he said. Tonight I just needed you to know you're not as alone as you think you are. He dropped his hand, stepped back, but before he turned, she reached out and caught his wrist. He stopped, looked down at her hand on his wrist, the tattoo beneath her fingers. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. She let go. He left. She stood at the window and pressed both hands against the glass and breathed and felt the specific terrifying feeling of something she hadn't protected herself against properly. 3 days later, he sat across from her at the dining table and told her everything. Marcus, Jinho, Amsterdam, 3 years of waiting. The day she walked through the door with her forged papers. You used me, she said. Yes. I was bait. Yes. She stood up, crossed to the window, put her back to him because if she looked at his face right now, something would break. He came to stand behind her. If I had told you the truth, he said quietly, you would have run. Yes, she said, I would have. And he would have found you in 3 weeks. She said nothing. I kept you here, he said, and I kept you safe. Both of those. Things are true simultaneously. That doesn't make the first one acceptable. No, he said, it doesn't. She turned around. He was closer than she realized. Close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes, and his eyes were right there carrying something that looked underneath all that control. Exactly like remorse. Real remorse. Not performed. Not calculated. Your brother, she said. His name was Jinho, he said. She held his gaze. The rage was real and she wasn't going to quiet it. But underneath it, something more complicated had started forming. I'm not your weapon, she said. No, he said. You're not. He reached up slowly and pushed one lock from her face. His fingers barely grazed her cheek, the tattoo on the back of his hand in the low light. She didn't step back. I'm still angry, she said. I know. He dropped his hand, stepped back. But something had changed and they both felt it and neither of them pretended otherwise. That same night she couldn't sleep. She was restless, the kind that lived in the body and didn't respond to reason. She went to the kitchen for water and nearly walked directly into Jiwoo in the dark hallway. Both of them stopped. He was in a plain white t-shirt and dark trousers, clearly from his office, and in just the Seoul city light filtering through the distant windows, the tattoo was more visible than she had ever seen it. The full arm, the chest piece showing at the neckline of his t-shirt on his skin, the neck ink, all of it visible for the first time all at once. The full record of everything he carried. She didn't look away. He looked at her for a long moment, like a decision being made in real time and completed. He crossed the distance in 2 steps. His hands came to her face, both of them, cradling her jaw with a gentleness that was completely inconsistent with everything the world knew about Kang Ji-woo. Tell me to stop, he said. I'm not going to tell you to stop, she said. He kissed her. Not soft, not tentative. He kissed her like a man who had made a decision and was committed to it completely. Deep and certain, and with both hands framing her face, and his body angled toward her like she was something he had spent weeks trying not to want, and had finally, with full knowledge of what it meant, stopped trying. Like he was done with all of the pretending, and had been done for some time, and was only now finally saying so. She kissed him back with everything she'd been carrying. The weeks of proximity and the rage and the grief and the water glass at 2 a.m, and the security rotation, and the window, and the held wrist and all of it. She kissed him with the full, honest weight of it. Nothing held back. Nothing calculated. His hand slid from her face to her waist. She felt the tattoo through the fabric and pressed closer rather than back. When they finally broke apart, she had her hands flat against his chest and his forehead was against hers, and they were both breathing harder than the hallway deserved. I'm still angry with you, she said against his mouth. I know, he said. That doesn't go away because of this. I know that too. Good. She pulled back enough to look at his face. He was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a complete word for yet, but understood entirely in her body. Just so we're absolutely clear. He kissed her again. Briefer this time, but no less certain. Like punctuation at the end of something that had been building for a very long time. She fell asleep that night for the first time in 8 months without counting a single exit. The next morning on the kitchen counter there was a fresh cup of tea made exactly the way she took it, which she had never told him and he had simply observed, and beside it a folded piece of paper. She opened it. His handwriting. clean, precise. 4 words. Rest today. I insist. She stood in the kitchen holding the note and felt something so warm and so unexpected move through her that she laughed, quietly, to herself, pressing her hand over her mouth, the same way she had that first time in this kitchen. Except this time she knew she was alone and let it run its full course. She kept the note. She spent the afternoon with the Korean architecture book she had found on his shelf. Photographs of Seoul buildings she couldn't read the captions for, but moved through slowly, building by building. And on the shelf behind her the whole time, among the neat dark-spined books, a small bright orange ceramic tiger. Slightly clumsy, handmade, the kind of thing a child made. It had no business being on that shelf among those clean, precise things, and she had known from the first time she saw it exactly what it was. When Jiwoo came in at mid-afternoon and found her with the book, she looked up and said, "Tell me about the tiger." He crossed the room and sat beside her on the arm of the couch. Looked at the ceramic tiger on the shelf. "He made it when he was 8, Jiwoo said. In school. He gave it to me because he said I was the most tiger-like person he knew." A pause. "I told him it was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen." "Did you keep it?" she asked. "I have moved it to every home I've lived in for 20 years, he said. She looked at him. At this man who had moved an ugly ceramic tiger to every home for 20 years, and kept a voicemail on his phone, and waited 3 years to balance a debt that could never actually be balanced because some things could not be undone no matter how much power you accumulated. She stood up and crossed to him and sat beside him on the arm of the couch, close, arms touching, and leaned her head against his shoulder. He went very still. Then slowly, carefully, he leaned his head against hers. "After this is over," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "I want to see the city," she said. "Not from up here, down there, walking in it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I will take you." 3 words. Simple. Carrying a future inside them. Small and fragile the way real futures always were. But there. She pressed closer and felt him breathe and thought, this is what it feels like to stop running. Not safety. Not certainty. Something better than both. Something that felt like choosing. The next morning, Daehyun's message arrived on a number only someone very resourceful could have found. "Marcus Vale landed in Incheon 6 hours ago. My offer stands. Say the word." She found Jiwoo in his study, knocked once, walked in without waiting, showed him the phone. He read it, set it down, looked at her. "He's here," she said. "Yes. What happens now?" Jiwoo stood, sleeves rolled to the forearm, the dark tattoo of Korean tigers and brushstroke art climbing from his hand up his arm fully visible on his skin. "Now," he said, "we finish this." "We," she said, "if you want to." She thought about 3 years. She thought about Jinho. She thought about a man who had used her and kept her and looked at her with remorse and meant every bit of it. "Tell me the plan," she said. The 4 days that followed were war preparation and the most charged days she had ever lived through simultaneously. Jiwoo worked with frightening focus. 4 hours sleep. 8 at his desk. Every word functional. His people moved through the penthouse with quiet efficiency. The building's atmosphere changed, became something coiled and pressurized and pointing in one direction. And yet he kept finding her. On the second evening, she came round the corner into the living room. And he was there, and before either of them decided anything, he had crossed the space and his hands were on her face. And he was kissing her. Urgent this time, different from the hallway. The weight of what was coming pressing through it. His hands in her locks pulling her close. And she kissed him back with equal urgency. Her hands gripping the front of his shirt, both of them saying without words everything that the next 4 days might not give them time to say. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead against hers, and they stood breathing together in the middle of the living room, with Seoul outside, and the whole dangerous weight of everything ahead of them. "I need you to stay close to Park during all of this," he said. "I know," she said. "I need you to promise me." She looked at him, at the face she had spent weeks carefully not studying and now knew by heart. "I promise," she said. He kissed her forehead, held his lips there for a long moment. Then he stepped back and returned to being the man who was going to end this. On the third day, he sat with her on the floor. His choice, which she understood was significant, and told her about Jinho. Not as information, as something he needed to give someone, and he had decided, someone worth giving it to. Jinho, who loved rain, who said the city smelled honest when it rained, like it had stopped pretending, who believed buildings were conversations between the person who built them and every person who ever stood inside them, who was 26 and planning Rome, and who had been chosen as a warning because Marcus Vale needed Jiwoo to feel something, and Jinho was the most effective way to make that happen. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she reached over and took his hand. He looked down at it, then turned his hand over and held hers, and they sat on the floor of the penthouse with everything between them and nothing needing to be added. That third night she came to find him. She walked into his office at 11 and stood in the doorway, and he looked up from his work and looked at her, and she crossed the room and kissed him, walked directly to him and kissed him first this time, with full knowledge of what she was doing and exactly what it meant. He made a sound against her mouth that she felt in her chest. Something releasing, something long held. His arms came around her and pulled her, close. And the desk and the documents and the 4 days of preparation ceased to exist for a few minutes. And there was only this. His hands in her locks and her hands at his face, and the city outside going about its enormous indifferent business, while they stood in the middle of everything, kissing like people who understood this might be the last quiet moment, before nothing was quiet anymore. When they finally stopped, she kept her hands on his face and looked at him. "After this," she said. "After this," he agreed. "Everything changes." "Yes," he said. "It does." He pressed his lips to her forehead. Long, deliberate, a promise. The fourth day arrived with raised voices and a shifted timeline. She dressed fast and came out to find the corridor tense, and Jiwoo already in the main room, jacket on, phone in hand. "Tonight instead of tomorrow," he said, cold and clarifying in her chest. "How long?" "Hours." He crossed to her immediately, reached up and tucked one lock behind her ear. "Stay. Close to Park," he said. "I'm not hiding," she said. The resistance moved through his face. Then something deeper. Recognition. Like he was seeing something in her that confirmed everything he had suspected. "Okay," he said. He kissed her. Brief, hard, purposeful. Said everything it needed to say in 3 seconds. Then he left and she stood in the middle of the room and breathed. Daehyun arrived an hour later wearing black and with the warmth replaced by something harder and colder underneath. He found her in the kitchen and came directly to her. He moved the timeline, he said. "I know." He looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Something quieter moved in underneath the hard. He crossed to her and stopped close. "I need to say something before tonight," he said. "Daehyun." "I know where this is," he said. "I know what you've already..." He stopped, then looked at her directly. "I just need you to know that what I felt when I saw you in that hallway was real. That part was never performance." She looked at him. This man who had offered her a choice when no one else had. "I know it is," she said quietly. He reached out and touched her face, the backs of his fingers against her cheekbone. Gentle in the way dangerous men sometimes were. He leaned in, the inch between them, half an inch. "Daehyun," she said, very quietly. Just his name, carrying everything she wasn't going to do. He stopped. A breath. Another. He pressed his lips to her forehead instead, held them there for a moment neither of them would forget, then stepped back and let his hand fall to his side. "Be safe tonight," he said, his voice rough at the edges. "You too," she said. He looked at her one last time, like he was saving something in a place that time wouldn't reach, and walked out to find Jiwoo. She stood alone in the kitchen with the full weight of everything, and breathed through it. Midnight came like a door kicked open. Marcus Vale arrived with 4 professional men, all of them moving through the penthouse entry, with the absolute confidence of people who believed resistance was a formality. They had mapped the building. They had studied the rotations. They were prepared. They had not prepared for the penthouse to already be waiting for them. Zara was at the living room window when Marcus walked in. She had chosen to be there. Jiwoo had said nothing either way, and she had simply decided. Black top, Black trousers, the grey cardigan gone. She was done being invisible. Marcus saw her. Then he saw the room. Then he understood, too late, that nothing about tonight was what he had planned. "You planned this," he said. "We planned this," Jiwoo said, walking in from the east corridor, his voice at its lowest and most dangerous. Daehyun stepped out from the far side of the room simultaneously. Black. Left arm tattoo visible on his skin where his sleeve was pushed back. Every trace of warmth stripped from his face and replaced by something colder and more fundamental. 2 bosses. Every exit closed. 1 woman at the window who had stopped running. Marcus's eyes cut to Zara. Something vicious and personal moving through them. "You set this up," he said. "You ran all the way to Seoul and you set me up." "She survived," Jiwoo said, voice at its absolute lowest. "There is a considerable difference, and she survived long enough to be standing in this room tonight. That is all that matters." Marcus moved, not toward Jiwoo, toward Zara, 1 fast, violent lunge, the move of a man who had decided if he was losing, he was taking something with him. Jiwoo was faster. He hit Marcus with a force that was clean and absolute, and completely without hesitation. His forearm driving across Marcus's chest, stopping the lunge and sending Marcus stumbling hard into the side table, scattering everything across the marble floor. Marcus hit 1 knee and came back up immediately because Marcus Vale had not built what he built by staying down, and he threw a full swing at Jiwoo's jaw with everything he had. Jiwoo slipped it by 1 inch. Pure precision. Came back with 2 shots, chest first to force the guard up, then jaw, snapping Marcus's head back hard. Marcus staggered into the wall. Then Marcus did something no one had planned for. His hand went inside his jacket. A second weapon. Smaller. Already clearing the holster. The room stopped. The gun came up aimed at Jiwoo's chest from 8 feet. Marcus bleeding from his lip. Breathing hard. But the calculation back in his eyes. Finding the last angle, the last move, the last thing he had left. "Back up," Marcus said, his voice cracking at the edges. "Back up, or I put you down in your own penthouse right now." Jiwoo looked at the gun. He took 1 step forward. "I said back up." Daehyun moved. The moment Marcus's hand had gone for the second weapon, Daehyun had already started crossing the room, fast and low, and the impact of his body, hitting Marcus's arm, sent the shot wide, the bullet punching into the wall 2 feet left of Jiwoo's shoulder, plaster exploding outward. Silence for 1 second. Then everything happened at once. Marcus's 4 men came from every direction simultaneously, and the penthouse living room stopped being a living room, and became something else entirely. The first man was the biggest, broad, fast for his size, coming from Jiwoo's left with a telescoping baton already extended, swinging for the side of his head with the practiced ease of someone who had used it many times before. Jiwoo dropped low, the baton cutting through the air where his head had been, came up inside the man's reach and drove his elbow up hard into the underside of the man's jaw. The sound of it was not cinematic. It was real, and it was final, and the big man went down and didn't get back up. The second man hit Jiwoo from behind before the first one had finished falling, arms locking around his chest from behind, lifting his feet off the marble, the grip of a man who knew how to use his size as a weapon. Jiwoo went with the lift instead of fighting it, dropped his chin to protect his throat, drove both elbows back hard into the man's ribs simultaneously, felt the grip crack open, and when his feet hit the marble, he spun fast and low and hit the man twice, jaw, then temple, and stepped over him already looking for the next problem. His shirt tore at the shoulder. The chest tattoo suddenly visible through the tear on his skin, dark and extensive across his chest. He didn't notice, didn't stop. The third man was smarter than the first 2. He hung back, waited, let Jiwoo commit to the second man's direction, and then came from the blind side. A solid hit to Jiwoo's ribs with something rigid and heavy, not a fist, something harder, and the impact bent Jiwoo sideways and sent him stumbling 2 steps. Pain radiated up his left side. He breathed through it. Reset. The third man came. Again. Fast. Confident. The confidence of someone who had just landed a good hit and expected the advantage to hold. It didn't hold. Jiwoo moved into the attack instead of away from it, closing the distance before the man could commit fully to the swing, and the fight went to the ground. 30 seconds of ugly, real violence on the marble floor. Not choreography, not cinematic. Just two bodies and the full ugly physics of what happened when trained men tried to end each other. Jiwoo took another hit, this one across the face, his head snapping sideways. The taste of blood immediate. He absorbed it, used the moment the man spent thinking he had done damage, and he ended it. He got to his feet, cut above his brow, bleeding freely now. Ribs screaming on the left side. The fourth man, the one who had hung back the entire time, the one who was watching and calculating, was now standing between Jiwoo and the doorway where Marcus had been standing, except Marcus was gone. Jiwoo looked at the fourth man. The fourth man looked at Jiwoo, at the torn shirt and the blood and the three men on the floor, and made a decision that was, given the evidence available to him, the correct one. He stepped aside. Jiwoo walked past him without breaking stride. Marcus had made it to the hallway. He had almost made it to the emergency stairwell door at the far end when Jiwoo's hand closed around his collar and spun him hard into the wall. Marcus hit the wall face first and came off it swinging, a desperate elbow aimed at Jiwoo's face that caught him on the cheekbone and sent a bright shock of pain through the right side of his head. Jiwoo felt it, filed it, kept his grip. They fought in the hallway, close and ugly and personal, in a way the living room hadn't been. This was different. This was 3 years of Jinho's name and the voicemail Jiwoo listened to every week, and the Rome trip that never happened, and the architecture books stacked in an apartment that was empty now. All of it coming through Jiwoo's hands and into Marcus's body, with the specific concentrated force of something that had been waiting exactly long enough. Marcus got one more swing in, wild and desperate and off balance. It clipped Jiwoo's shoulder and moved him back one step. One step. That was all. Jiwoo hit him back. Once. The ribs, forcing the guard down. Twice. The jaw, snapping his head sideways. A third time. Direct, final, with everything 3 years had been building toward behind it. Marcus went into the wall and down it, and sat on the marble floor of the hallway, and didn't get up. He tried once. His hands pressed flat against the floor, his body starting to push upward. Jiwoo put one hand on his shoulder and pressed him back down, with a force that was not dramatic and did not need to be. "Stay down," he said, quietly. The same voice he used for everything. Low and architectural and completely certain. "It is finished." Marcus looked up at him from the floor. The calculation was still trying to run. She could see it in his eyes from the end of the hallway where she was standing. The last desperate search for an angle, for something that wasn't closed. And then something went out in his expression. The calculation stopped. The empire he had built from fear and other people's suffering finally, on the floor of a penthouse hallway in Seoul, ran out of moves. Park moved in, secured him, efficient and professional and without drama. Jiwoo stood over Marcus for one moment longer. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Everything that needed saying had been said with Jinho's name, said with 3 years of waiting, said with everything that had just happened in this corridor. There was nothing left to add. He turned and looked for Zara. Across the room, Daehyun had 2 men down, and was finishing the third. He fought differently from Jiwoo, lower and faster, and more angular, taking a hard hit to the face that snapped his, head sideways and responding with something that ended the engagement completely in 2 seconds. He crossed to her in 5 steps and his hands went to her face immediately, checking, cataloguing, making absolutely sure. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." She covered his hands with hers. "You are. Minor. Come with me." She took him to the kitchen. She cleaned the cut above his brow, while he sat on the counter and watched her face the entire time she worked. The torn shirt, the visible chest tattoo on his skin, the bruising forming at his jaw, all of it out in the open now. No more layers, no more architecture, just him. "Hold still," she said. "I'm not moving." "You're moving your face. I'm looking at you." She glanced up, 6 inches away. Those dark hooded eyes completely open and direct and unguarded. "Stop," she said. "No," he said. She pressed the cloth with more pressure than strictly necessary. He didn't flinch. He didn't stop. When she finished, she set the cloth down. She meant to step back. She didn't step back. His hands found her waist and drew her in, and she came. Choosing, she was always choosing now. That was the thing that had fundamentally changed. And he kissed her slowly, and with complete certainty. The torn shirt, and the bruising, and the full weight of the night between them, and none of it mattering against the simple, undeniable fact of this. She kissed him back, and felt something settle in her chest that had not been settled in 3 years. Not the adrenaline of danger, not the relief of survival. Something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. Daehyun found them there. He stood in the kitchen doorway, looked at Jiwoo, looked at Zara, at her hands on his chest and his hands at her waist and the whole, undeniable fact of what was happening. Something moved through his expression. The quiet thing. What a man looked like when he had genuinely hoped for something, and understood before being told that it wasn't going to happen, and had made peace with it because underneath everything he was more decent than his world had any right to produce. He nodded at Jiwoo. Once. Jiwoo looked at him. Something passed between them. Old wounds and old war and a shared night and an acknowledgement that neither of them would ever put into words, and both of them meant completely. Daehyun looked at Zara. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm sure," she said. He smiled. The real one. Warm and completely unguarded and costing him something visible to give. And he gave it anyway because that was who he was underneath everything. "Take care of each other," he said. "God knows you both need it." He left. The penthouse settled. Later, everything was still. Marcus gone. The city outside. Exactly what it always was. Blazing and indifferent and vast and entirely unconcerned. She found Jiwoo in his bedroom sitting on the edge of the bed in the torn shirt. He looked up when she came in. She sat beside him. The specific quiet of two people who had come through something enormous and were still, against reasonable expectation, here. "Is it over?" she asked. "The part with Marcus," he said. "Yes." "And the other part?" He looked at her. "What do you want me to say?" "Something true," she said, without calculating it first. He held her gaze for a long moment. "I stopped thinking of you as leverage 9 days after you arrived," he said. "I don't know what I started thinking of you as after that. I am still working that out, but whatever it is..." He paused. "It is the most significant thing I have worked on in 3 years. Not poetry. The truth from a man who had forgotten how to give it, landing harder than any poem could." She reached over and took his hand. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know. I need time. I know. But I'm here," she said. "Choosing to be here. You understand the difference between that and simply having nowhere else to go." "I understand it," he said. "I have thought about nothing else." She looked at him. At all of it. "Okay," she said. She leaned in and kissed him. Soft and slow and certain. Nothing to prove and nothing to perform. Just the honest fact of choosing. His hand came up to her face, the tattoo against her cheek, and she leaned into his palm and felt the full weight of it, and didn't pull away from any of it. He lay back slowly and drew her with him, and she went. Choosing. Always choosing now. And they lay together in the quiet of the bedroom with Sol outside the window, and she put her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her and held on with the specific grip of a man who had stopped calculating and was simply, finally, holding on. They talked in the dark, the real talking, the kind that happened when every guard was fully down, and there was no performance left in either of them. He told her more about Jinho, the specific way he laughed at his own jokes before the punchline. The argument about classical versus modern architecture they'd had for 3 straight years. The call at 2 a.m. just to say he'd had an idea and needed to tell someone. The Rome trip that was planned for April. She told him about Lagos, about watercolors and the way paint moved when you stopped fighting it. About the version of herself that had existed before 3 years of running had made her into something harder and more careful, and less like herself. He listened like she was the only thing in the world, and the world was enough. His hand moved slowly through her locks. She felt his breathing slow and deepen beneath her cheek. He pressed his lips into her hair. Once, twice. A third time. Slower, like he wasn't counting. Like he simply couldn't stop doing it. She didn't fall asleep immediately. She lay against his chest and listened to his breathing slow and felt the warmth of him all along her side and looked at the soul darkness through the bedroom window and let herself exist in this moment without managing it or calculating it or preparing to leave it. This was new. This specific thing, lying somewhere without already planning the exit, without one ear always open for footsteps in the corridor or a sound that didn't belong, without her left shoe within reach because her documents were in it. She was just here, lying in the dark with a man who had used her and kept her and protected her and looked at her with remorse and meant it, and had asked about her mother by the window in the rain like it was the most natural question in the world. She pressed closer, felt him shift slightly in his sleep, his arm tightening around her without waking. Like even asleep, some part of him was aware of her and reaching toward her. She thought about the ceramic. Tiger on the shelf. 20 years of carrying it from home to home. 20 years of an ugly thing made by a 26-year-old's 8-year-old hands, being the one decorative object in a penthouse that otherwise contained nothing that wasn't functional and precise. She understood it now. She understood it the way you understood something that you felt before you could explain. The ceramic tiger was the only thing in this penthouse that hadn't been arranged. It was just there because it was supposed to be there. Because it had always been there. Because some things you carried not because they were useful or strategic, but because they were real, and the rest of your life wasn't always. She thought about her own things, the things she had left in apartments across 4 countries, the small watercolor set she had bought in Lisbon and left behind in Taipei because she couldn't carry it and run at the same time. The photograph of her mother at the airport that she had stopped keeping in, her wallet because photographs were identifying. The green dress she had left hanging in a wardrobe in Nairobi that she had loved and that she would never go back to get. All the things she had put down because survival required traveling light. She thought, when this is over, I am going to buy a watercolor set, a good one, and I am going to sit in front of a window in a city I have chosen, and I am going to paint something that goes somewhere I didn't plan for, and I am going to let it. Jiwoo shifted beside her. His eyes opened. Slowly, not with alarm, just waking slightly, the way people woke when they felt something change around them. He looked at her in the dark. She looked back. You should sleep, he said, his voice low and rough with the edges of sleep. I know, she said. Are you all right? The question was simple and direct and asked without any performance. Just genuine, just wanting to know. She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. I think I actually am. Something moved across his face in the dark. Something she felt more than saw. He reached up and touched her face. Just his fingers, just briefly. The tattoo on the back of his hand against her cheek in the dark. Then he pulled her back in against his chest and held on, and she put her head back down and listened to his heartbeat. An outside soul carried on blazing and indifferent, and she thought, I came here to disappear. She closed her eyes. She thought, I am never doing that again. She fell asleep against his chest and didn't count a single exit. She woke first. The room was grey with early morning. Jiwoo asleep beside her. And asleep, without the architecture, without the controlled expression, without every layer he had built over 3 years to keep the world at the correct distance. He looked like himself. The self he might have been if grief hadn't had so much time to build with. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment, at the tattoo at his neck on his skin, the blonde streak against the pillow, the bruising at his jaw. She thought about Jinho, who had believed you could understand people by what they built. She thought, I understand what this man built. I understand every wall and why it exists. And I am, with full knowledge of what it costs, willing to learn the rooms inside them. She got up quietly and went to the window. Seoul in the early morning, the neon dying back into grey, the city exhaling after the night, all that relentless energy briefly soft. She stood at the same window she had stood at when she arrived, desperate and invisible, and running on nerve and forged paper and the very last of a particular kind of hope, and looked at the same city. It looked different now. It looked like somewhere she had chosen. She heard him wake, the sheets shifting, his footsteps unhurried. He came and stood beside her. They were quiet for a moment, just the two of them, Soul waking up below. "You're up early," he said. "I didn't want to miss it," she said. "The morning. It looks different when you're not planning to leave it." He reached out and took her hand. "I need you to understand something," she said. "Tell me." "I am not staying because I have nowhere else to go," she said. "I am staying because this is the first place in 3 years I have been fully seen. Not used, not tracked, not managed. Seen." She felt the word and meant every part of it. "And I am not willing to give that up. Not for easier. Not for safer." She paused. "But I am not part of your operation. I am not leverage. I am not a piece on a board. If that ever becomes what this is—" "It won't," he said. "If it ever becomes what this is," she continued, "I will leave. And this time there is no door you can hold." "I know," he said, steady, direct, carrying the full weight of what he was agreeing to and meaning every word of it. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to it. The tattoo on the back of his hand against her palm. He held it there for a moment that needed nothing added to it. They stood together looking at Soul coming back to life below them. Indifferent, blazing, beautiful, entirely unconcerned with the two people standing above it, making something real out of the aftermath of everything. She had come to Soul to disappear. She had ended up the most visible she had ever been. Seen, chosen, standing at a penthouse window at dawn, with a dangerous and complicated and finally honest man beside her who was learning, slowly and imperfectly and with her direct involvement, that some things could not be planned for or engineered or calculated. Zara had stopped being invisible. She had done it entirely on her own terms. And Soul, loud and relentless and blazing Soul, carried on below as if it had always known exactly where she was. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know what it cost her to get here. 3 years of running, one obsessive ex who refused to let her breathe, and one penthouse she was never supposed to be in. That turned out to be exactly where her story changed. Some of you watching this are in the middle of your own version of that journey. You are not at the ending yet, but you are moving, and that matters more than you know. Drop your city in the comments. Let us see where Zara's story traveled today. Share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe. Because every week we come back here and we tell stories about women who choose themselves. Even when it is dangerous, even when it is complicated, even when the man who sees them most clearly is the last man they should trust. Zara found out what it means to stop being invisible, and so can you.